this Friday morning, February 14th, and we're continuing to look at pre-charge diversion generally as part of our evaluation, or looking into the budget requests that we understand that entities that are under our jurisdiction have made. So we're going to start with Dr. Robin Joy. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. For the record, Dr. Robin Joy, the Director of Research for Crime Research Group. And today I was asked to talk about some prior research that I did into the cost of diversion and the recidivism rates of diversion. And I'm going to try to put that all in context and talk a little bit also about future research that we're doing with diversion, and trying to get at good ways to measure it. So I just want to, some of the things that I gave you today are some old reports, starting with a cost benefit report that we did for the entire criminal justice system. And just since Monica isn't here to talk about how awesome I am, I will. I won a national peer-reviewed award for that report, costing out the criminal justice system. And I want to talk about that and then move into the court diversion recidivism, another study that we did on equal access to alternative programs, and then refer you back to the great interactive Act 40 report that I did, which outlines the current diversion and all alternative justice programs. So way back when, in 2012, when Monica, who's currently on vacation, when Monica was at the Department of Corrections and started, your Joint Fiscal Office hired us to work with Pew Research, come up with a cost-benefit analysis or costing out of the criminal justice system in an initiative that was called Results First. This initiative was funded by the MacArthur T. Catherine C. Casey Foundation. Pew Research was the technical assistance provider, and we were modeling the Washington State Institute for Public Policy, and that's the research branch of the Washington State Legislature, their cost-benefit analysis for criminal justice programs. We worked with the legislature. Mitzi was the head of appropriations at the time, and she worked with us. On the Senate side, Kitchell went with us. Becca, when she was here, went with us to work on all of this stuff. And we cost out the entire criminal justice system and what programs we were offering at the time and what programs were shown to actually have benefit, right? And so it was a lot of work. It was a lot of good work. Unfortunately, the title was called Results First. And at the time, the legislature was very interested in results-based accountability. And the results got kind of mixed up in people's minds. And so they saw it as a clash, that they didn't want the results first because it clashed. It didn't clash, but that's what people thought, that it clashed with this idea of results-based accountability. We tried to get some interest continuing on costing out the criminal justice system, and things happened, and it never kind of took off again. So you do have what we did to cost out the criminal justice system. And I want to bring to your attention that when we did this, you had not yet decriminalized pot. And I bring this up because before you decriminalized pot, it was one of the top 5 charges in our criminal justice system, the simple possession. And when you decriminalized pot, no one lost their jobs. And the reason why no one in the criminal justice system lost their jobs is because people shifted to do other things, right? There is an opportunity cost that we were trying to measure out of what happens when you add or take away somebody from the system. And if you take away this huge amount of arrest time, it turns out that police are going to focus on something else, like burglaries, or going to the schools and chatting with kids, or doing all sorts of other things. So, it's always one of those things when, like, how much does the criminal justice system cost? What really costs is opportunity. And what would you rather be spending your time on? That said, we did the best that we could to figure out what does it take to add one more person to the system. And this is what's called a marginal cost. So how much does it cost to bring them to the station, to fingerprint them, to photograph them, to cite them? How much does it cost for the judge to arraign them? How much does it cost for probation to do the intakes? And so that's what you have in that first cost benefit final report. We have updated it over the years, just in other reports, especially where the judiciary does a time study every once in a while. So they're actually sitting there with a stopwatch saying, this is how much it takes for me to arraign somebody, or this is how much it takes for me to handle a divorce. We also always look at the cost of an out-of-state bed. If you were to look at some of the drivers of criminal justice costs, it's those out-of-state beds, so that if we're removing somebody from a correctional facility, then what we're saving is the cost of that out-of-state bed. So it's just to give you the history of how we got to these cost-benefit analyses. When it came to diversion in 2019, we did a report looking at the cost-benefit analysis of diversion and a recidivism analysis. And I want to stop here and say that the recidivism analysis is awesome. It is still the best for first-time offenders. It is still the best thing I have ever evaluated in my 20 years of evaluating criminal justice programs here. So it works. However, it is not the only measurements that we should be concerned about. And that where you see, failures in a recidivism rate, that's not a failure necessarily. And so we do have a current federal grant that was awarded before the change of federal administration, so should still go forward, working with WILA and the CJCs to come up with a better framework for evaluating the effectiveness of diversion programs. And this will include, working on a results-based accountability sort of idea, and then also, piloting some surveys and things like that. It ties into another discussion that has been going around about, desistance. What does that mean, and how do we measure it? So I want to say that this report exists. I think it's good, but there's more to it that we're working on. So when you look at diversion, especially for first-time offenders, the recidivism rate was less than 0.5%. So that was anyone who had committed a new offense that showed up in the criminal histories, right? So that's the first thing. What shows up in the criminal histories? And so this was, did they get a new offense at any time after they completed diversion? And it was less than 0.5%. And that really is awesome. It was lower than people who'd gone through the criminal justice system who were also first-time offenders, right? So that recidivism rate was a little bit higher. I have to find my numbers here. Apologize. I had my numbers all set up. I think it was closer to 5 or 6%. And so the program mattered, the diversion mattered. Sometimes they couldn't, you're not eligible to be a recidivist because we've taken care of the problem. So if we've gotten your license back, then you can't get busted for driving on a suspended license again, right? And if that's the only thing that was showing up on your record, then, well, we've done well. And that's the point of, right, helping people overcome those barriers is one of the services that diversion provides. So we do want to say that it was very, very successful. And if you want to look at the costs at the time, and this is 2019 numbers, and what we did for this is we had the diversion folks log their hours. I timed them for the time that they were working on different cases. So if they're working on assaults, they recorded that. If they were working on retail theft, et cetera. They logged the total number of hours that they were working on these cases for about a month. And then we looked at how long they, what the cost of for that versus the cost of the traditional criminal justice system. And assaults took the most, and it does not capture, I just want to say, does not capture the hours and hours of volunteer time that may go into these. We did not capture that, and we did not quantify that, but that's a huge service to the state that these volunteers provide.
Yeah. Just, are you in the report right now?
I am.
What page are you on?
12 and 13.
Thank you.
And I could be in the report and not actually talking about but I actually am going to talk about what's on page 12.
Yeah, I wanted to follow along. So
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm on table 13. Oh, yeah. Actually, sorry, 12 and 13 of the PDF, page 11 of the actual report.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so we looked at what these most serious offenses were on the docket. So assaults took the most time, about 11 hours per case, domestic 6.7. Public order, this includes your disorderlies, your violations of conditions of release, Trespasses, that was about 5 per case. Drug cases, about 4.5 hours. Fraud and theft, which includes your retail thefts, that was 4.3 hours. Motor vehicles, so your DLSs, was 3.9, and then all other cases were about 13.5. And those include your fish and games, or other things that didn't quite fit into, I didn't have enough of these other categories. And so the average cost per case was, anywhere from $76 to $216 of diversion time in 2019 dollars, compared to the traditional criminal justice cost of about $1,500. So this is table 14 on the report number, the actual page number 12. So assaults, $216 to $1,485 to $1,480 for traditional criminal justice costs. So it was terribly cost effective. And because these folks aren't coming back into the system, you're not getting the additional cost of the trips through the system, of how many times the person might come back, because they're not coming back. They're moving on with their life, or this doesn't include out-of-state criminal histories, so they could have moved out of state. But that is what the takeaway was for this. At the time that we did this study, the legislature had kind of pushed on diversion, a need to take on more high case management needs folks. And when we evaluated them, they weren't up and running on that. So it's not a fair evaluation of that, where, those are the folks that didn't do as well. And we'll look and talk more to the history and the timing of that. But my memory is that they had just started taking those folks. And when we did the evaluation, so there hadn't been enough time to kind of retool or to really think about how to handle these extremely high need folks, and how to serve them better. So as you're looking at, expanding the pre-charge, right? So this is post-charge diversion. Looking at pre-charge, what I would want you to be aware of are the next report on the equal access to alternative programs. Because as I was listening to the testimony yesterday and thinking about the inevitable question about, well, did we do any better, or what are the risks associated with it? One of the things that I was thinking of is, making sure that we are being mindful and having the guardrails around to make sure that, there isn't impermissible bias in who's getting referred to alternative programs and who isn't, and how do we track that? There's also the risk of creep, so that people who would not have, perhaps been arrested may now be referred to pre-charge diversion, because now that's an option. So, right. So are we expanding the pool of folks that might be, so if we're looking at the numbers, for example, of who gets arraigned in the courts that might be diverted down through a pre-charge program, you want to look at also the arrests that are currently happening, and are we expanding accidentally or intentionally, the folks that are being served by these programs, that somebody would not have been engaged in the criminal justice system now, but is going to be engaged in the diversion because we're giving this other option, right? When we did look at the equal access to the programs, at the time, the Attorney General's office was using spreadsheets, et cetera. It wasn't very good. Willa and I are struggling with how to measure racial disparities in alternative programs, specifically diversion, and that's one of the things we'll be working on over the next year or so. I do want to, and I'm not hooked up online, but I do want to point you to the Act 40 report. There is a whole section on diversion and Attorney General, so you can play around with that again and see what charges are being censored diversion, the completion rates based on race, by county who's getting sent to diversion. And we are looking forward to being able to add this pre-charge data, as it expands and gets put into the system. And for those who didn't hear me last time, and now that Willa's in the room, I will say it again. Willa's data was among the best that we had for the Act 40 report coming out of Law Manager. And so thanks to her and to Ann Walker for doing that. And I'm quick today.
And just being clear, the version on the Act 40 report is post-charge or court diversion.
Yes,
Right.
yes. Yeah, that was all the data that we had because it's not in the system, right?
So, maybe Willa will be able to answer this just as far as the data, is it going to be the equivalent data to what you're having post-charge diversion for what pre-charge diversion? And I see that you're nodding your head in assent.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions for, Rob? Yeah, Karen.
Just kind of summarizing, so even taking this away, is that that there has been some really important data collection analysis on the effectiveness and cost savings of post-charge diversion, and that we as a state are well equipped to collect data on pre-charge diversion once it's
Now you are, yes.
yes, now we are.
Yes.
And it sounds like also that the fact that it's in AGO hands is good because they have really great data collections. They get a gold star.
They have people who care very much about data. Not to say other people don't care about data, but it certainly has been a priority to make sure that there's complete and accurate data. And I appreciate that.
Any other questions for Rob? Thank you so much. It's
Sure.
always enlightening. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And those reports are on our website for folks to read over the weekend, and I'm printing mine off. So I've actually read them before.
All right, and I am actually going to leave you all today. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Yes.
All right, so Becky, if you could join us.
This is for you, Tom.
See that, thank you. Wow.
Wow.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
For the record, I'm Becky Penberthy, and I work at the Burlington Community Justice Center as the Adult Restorative Services Manager. But I have more that I want to share with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe. I probably should be able to introduce myself without reading about myself, but I wrote down some thoughts so I didn't forget to share some things with you. So currently at the Burlington Community Justice Center for the last 3 years, my anniversary is in 1 week. But prior to that, I did a brief 2-year stint as a court operations manager in Addison County, thinking I might want to try something else after leaving Lamoille Restorative Center for 16 years. So Heather Hobart, who you met with yesterday, is my supervisor for that period of time. And I have a lot of respect and affection for that agency as well as my own, as you can imagine. So I have done a lot of work with both victims and those who are responsible for crime and harm. I have about a 21-year background in restorative justice work at this point. So I want to sort of take you on a brief walk through the restorative process. In my opinion, restorative justice at its core is really about being in right relationship and good relations with others. If I say or do something to Representative Oliver that harms him or impacts him, I've impacted our relationship, whether I know him or not. And it becomes my responsibility then to repair that relationship. And I have to hold myself accountable. And if I can't do that, I need others to help me with that. The speed at which this happens, I think, matters for everyone involved, and because really impact can change over time. For the person causing the harm, if the more time it takes, it sort of feels like less and less of a big deal, right? And for the person on the receiving end of that harm, it can feel like no one really cares about them or about accountability. I have a couple of victims that I'm currently working with in Chittenden County where they were just out in the world and had a negative interaction that was not at all their fault, and they were assaulted. And one of them happened, I don't know, a month ago, and the person responsible for that crime isn't scheduled for their arraignment until April 8th. So that can be really hard, that gap in time for victims, especially hard when the person's out in the world. I feel like there are only a couple of remedies to a situation like that, and it's really immediate support for that victim and regular information sharing so that they understand like what's next and what's next. And then my opinion about the other remedy is honestly pre-charge, and it's really from my own lens of working in Lamoille County and not having pre-charge, and then coming to Chittenden County, and for the last 3 years, people having access to pre-charge. I'm gonna just share a story about a person that, well, a few people that I worked with in Chittenden County not that long ago. I'm gonna change things around about names and genders, and so it won't be identifiable, but at the same time, it's actually what happened. So a young man was out drinking with his friends. He doesn't live in Vermont, but he was here visiting and out drinking with his friends. And they went to a few different places. They had dinner and then, went and continued having some cocktails. They had an Airbnb, so they had a safe plan about how they were going to not drive after drinking. And at some point that night, we'll call him Steve, he became separated from his group of friends. They didn't know what happened to him. They imagined he went to the bathroom. He disappeared with one of his friend's coats, and I think they did call police to say, we can't find our friend. For a while, they imagined he just made his way back to the Airbnb, but he actually just left downtown. He remembered walking through the woods, and the next thing he remembers was waking up in someone's private home on their couch. So there was a dog in the house, and the dog alerted the family. It was a husband and a wife and their youngish son. He was about 12 at the time. And so I can't imagine for myself what it would be like to be sleeping in my house, to hear something that I can't necessarily identify, and then find a guy on my couch. And even in this business, I'm still going to think the worst, right? I'm going to think that he has bad plans for me and my family. Or I'm going to think he's scary. This guy wasn't scary, but they had no idea. They didn't know him. So the husband ordered him to sit on the couch and not move. He was incredibly disoriented and did that for a period of time. And then he really freaked out, and he got up and ran out of the house. The police found him. I don't know when the injury happened. He got some injury. They took him to the hospital. They were kind of worried about him in general because based on his story, it just, he didn't have a memory of how he had gotten there. So the incident this night happened on March 15th. So his police first contact with police about this thing was right when it happened on March 15th. I got the referral the next day. So I'm reading this in real time, the next day. And I decided to reach out to the victims first. I feel like a lot of times we get these cases and people are thinking about the responsible party and the participant, and I absolutely am every time. But I think they think the referral is the participant, but honestly, the referral is everyone. So I reach out to the victims. I would say, I've done hundreds, I don't even know, thousands, hundreds cases, and they were probably of the top 10 angriest people I'd ever talked to in my whole life. But I don't take it personally. I've done this enough to roll with it and know, be able to tell myself that it's not about me. And there was lots of swearing. I acknowledged that this is terrible. In fact, in my head, and I didn't share this with them, I would if this were me, I'd want a new couch. They were considering moving. So their whole world was sort of thrown, their safety was really impacted by this. So I spent lots of time on the phone with them over a period of time, and then did meet with them in person. My first meeting with Steve, which I would call an intake, was 11 days after the incident. So I would have talked to him on the phone and then scheduled his intake. That was in person. I think in person is important in these processes, especially a situation like this. After talking with everyone, the victims, what they really wanted was to see him in person. There was a little complication here, though, because this person was, and the family didn't know this, the person was a traveling medical professional, and so he wasn't in the state anymore. And so I had to think about that, they really, really needed this. Their child was still their child had moved out of their bedroom and was now camping out on the parents' floor because their safety was so impacted by this. So, Rachel Jolly is my supervisor. Most of you know her. And so I was sort of struggling with the making him come back piece because he was somebody who was able to afford that. I have a hard time asking someone who can afford something to do something and knowing I couldn't ask someone who couldn't afford to fly back to do that. And we decided that if we ever needed to fly someone back to meet with a victim, we would figure out how to do that. So I told him he had to come back. He did not want to hear that. He didn't want to fly back. He said, can't we do it on Zoom? And I said, no, I'm sorry, but the only way for the people who were impacted by your behavior that night are going to feel better about this is if you come back. So we made plans for that. We moved towards having that restorative conversation, which some people would call a victim offender dialogue. The other piece that we were working on over here, just me and Steve, was the fact that he was so drunk that night that he blacked out and he didn't remember what happened to him. He doesn't remember how he got into that house. He doesn't remember anything. There's science behind blackouts, and so we talked a lot about that. And he decided, with my encouragement, that he needed to attend to a potential alcohol use disorder. So he got right into a counselor for an alcohol assessment and started that process and decided on a period of abstinence. So that was really important. You know, we have to, as restorative justice practitioners or people that are administering pre-charge diversion, TAMRAC, any of those cases, we do need to attend to the underlying conditions related to the behavior. Because if we're not attending to that, then that's when Robin gets numbers that she doesn't like. And I don't like the meeting. So I brought the group all together, the husband, the wife, and Steve in a restorative conference. And that's when I asked the questions of everyone, but mostly, the questions of Steve, what happened? So he goes first. He tells the story of what happened because the family has lots of questions for him about what happened. And I don't answer those questions. That's for him to answer. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? A little bit tough for him because he can't remember some things, but he talked about his day before this happened and then what he remembers after he was having the encounter with the police. Who's been impacted and how, and what do you think you need to do to make amends? So there are little breaks in there because my questions to the family are, what did you think when you realized what had happened? And what's been the hardest thing for you? The hardest thing question is always the most important question. And they said, this has really impacted us. We're thinking about moving. My son is sleeping on the floor of my bedroom every night because he feels unsafe. They had weapons in the house. Like one of the things that the husband worried about was like, you essentially broke into my house. What if the first thing I did was grab my gun? That would be a totally different story. It could be potentially that the husband's being charged at this point. So fortunately, the husband didn't do that. I understand his thinking though, and we all did. And it was interesting for them to come together to see each other as humans and to acknowledge that they're now in relationship. Hearing that Steve didn't mean to harm them, that this was an act without intent, really did make the couple feel better about the situation. I keep restorative processes pretty tight, like with the questions, because I want to create safety. And after a while, when they're starting to take care of their conversation on their own, I sort of step back and I start to be quiet and I let them freely converse and connect. Everybody cries in a restorative process. It's something I never anticipate. I don't think, oh, everybody's going to cry, but everybody cries in a restorative process. Even this very sort of angry, dad in this situation who had every reason to be angry. He cried and began connecting with Steve. I did check on Steve about a month ago, and this has been a couple of years, and he's doing really well. He's retained his licensed position, which would have been impacted had he been charged and convicted of a crime. He's says he's still sober and not drinking, which I appreciated hearing. I have not talked with the couple, but I do believe if the couple needed to talk with me, I would absolutely hear from them. So I didn't even think of a way to wrap any of this up. I guess what I would leave you with is I've done several of these conferences. They're always better restorative processes. I always say when I go into a situation like this, when I was working with Heather, I would call her on the phone and I would say, this is never going to work. And she would say, it's going to work. It'll be fine. But I had to say it. And so I still do it to someone else now. It works every time if you do the work up ahead of time. That's the important piece. And, but it works better when it's faster. Like if I can get the referral the next day or within the next few days and reach out to the victims of a crime within a day or so, that just is incredibly impactful for everyone.
Appreciate that. And then, yeah, Tom.
So there was a law enforcement interaction the night before?
It was during the incident. So they found him on the couch. They
Oh,
called the police.
Okay, yeah, but there was an interaction.
Yeah.
Obviously, they caught.
Yeah, they caught him.
And identified him. So how did you receive the referral?
It's the standard way we get them in from the Burlington Police Department. They write up an affidavit. This one was probably 3 paragraphs. And then it's emailed to me with information about how to contact the responsible party and the victims.
Was there a charge?
There was a charge. But not a charge, law enforcement level charge, not state's attorney charge.
So it was like an unlawful trespass?
Exactly. Which honestly didn't feel good to the couple. They were like, that,
We felt more than that.
yeah, it felt more than that. But like unlawful mischief, simple assault, what assault is truly simple?
Other questions for Becky? No, it's good. It's very helpful to kind of hear really how a process plays out.
Yeah.
So that really,
Okay.
really is helpful. So not seeing any other questions. So I think we'll go to, if we go to Rob first, if that's all right. Well, I know Willa anchoring this again, but this time we'll give you all the time you need.
I have 4 of these, so if anybody's interested in the Burlington Community Justice Center's annual report, first one ever, just published this month.
Is there an electronic? Well, we can get that. We can.
I'll send one to Nate. Yes, absolutely.
Great, great.
I'll stop by and grab one.
Okay.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me here.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
I guess for the record, my name's Rob Mahalik, and I am the chair of the executive board of the Williston Community Justice Center. The executive board is a volunteer board, and so my position as chair is volunteer. I think what might be of interest to you is that I've been looking at our program over the last fiscal year. So this would be the year ending June 30th, 2024, and just some of the numbers, how the program works for us. And so in terms of pre-charge work, we resolved 228 cases last fiscal year. So that would be with, restorative contracts and working out between affected parties and responsible parties. And in most cases, we deal mostly with responsible parties. Oftentimes, like in shoplifting, you're going to have somebody like a national retailer that doesn't really want to, they're the affected party, but they don't want to really participate. So we may be just dealing with responsible parties. But we resolved 228 cases last year. So we had 173 what we call resource referrals or needs navigation cases. So oftentimes you may have people that are in either a mental health crisis, or there might be something like addiction, or just are without housing, need food. And so what we have been able to do is become the center for Williston. And by the way, I should note that the Williston Center serves Williston, St. George, Heinsberg, Richmond, Huntington, Bolton, and the coordinating school systems within that. So CVU, MMU, and then other schools. I don't think I missed any of those. So we're working, our service towns are all of those. And like Becky, Burlington obviously is serving Burlington, South Burlington, but there are some community justice centers that are serving multiple towns and school systems, and we're one of those. So in looking at what I would call 401 resolved cases, when you take those needs navigations and the restorative contracts, with our budget, which was about 144,000 came from the state DOC grant, and about 85,000 came from the service towns, Williston being the primary town and grant holder, and then Richmond and Heinsberg kicking some in. With that total budget of 229,000, with 401 cases resolved for the year, that comes out to about $571 per case resolved. And so if you want to measure what's the cost effectiveness of it, those are numbers that I've been working at. In terms of volunteers, we had about 1,281. I guess that's not an about, that's pretty precise. 1,281 volunteer hours in that fiscal year. We had 35 volunteers helping out. And the Williston CJC just has one full-time staff member and one full-time executive director. So basically 2 FTEs, if you will. I did some calculations on my own of what the center actually would need if we were really to be able to provide the services to the affected parties and responsible parties. We would need about 120 staff hours per week. So divide that into 40 hours, and we really need about 2 more full-time staff members to actually do everything that we think would satisfy the program that we're trying to present to the towns. So it was interesting listening to Becky. So I in my role with the executive board, I also participate on the restorative panel. So I've done a lot of contracts with responsible parties. And personally, yes, I've cried several times. I've cried myself. Most of the time, it's out of seeing the transformation that this process has for responsible parties. I know that in some cases we've had responsible parties. We had a responsible party came in and the person was totally high, and so we had to discontinue that night. It's like, no, can't do it. And went into a process of getting the needs and services that person needed, and then was able to continue the restorative contract at a later date. That party completed the contract, and when that party came back in, was totally sober, was a totally different person, was incredibly productive. Just the transformation was remarkable. And I've seen that time and time again with this program. So really, you're taking people, helping them to really be accountable, be responsible, but also, transform their own lives. And, you can imagine now this person, I only suspect I don't know because I haven't done the personal follow-up, but this person is now a productive member of the community instead of in some, social needs case, might be a stress on the community. I've seen that several times. And also part of what happens in this process is when you start peeling away the layers of the onion. We had one case, and by the way, I won't get long-winded on cases, but just another case that was remarkable to me was a road rage case. And part of what we're trained to do is to listen for understanding and not to listen to respond to, whatever your emotions are, because we're all human beings in this, but, you get the good training. And when we realized what was behind this person's road rage, we realized that this person had so many needs that built up to that moment of expression. And the restorative contract was totally different than what you might have thought it was for road rage. It was really about her personal needs. I gave a gender, sorry about that, trying to keep it as confidential as I can. But that person got that. And what she said in the time that they were with us was, it was the first time that anybody ever listened to what the needs were. And so to me, restorative justice is about that. It's looking at the humanity and not trying to dehumanize somebody, but actually try to rehumanize somebody. And the success, well, I don't have the numbers of our success rate, but I know that our executive director, Crystal Lee McSweeney, has often said that we're well above 95% success rate. That other 5% might be some people. There are very few people that actually just aren't right for the process. And so that case goes back. And we've had very few that I know have not been able to really complete their contract as designed. So I think that's what I was here to share.
No, it's very
Any
helpful.
questions?
No, it's very helpful. Any questions? Thank you very much. No, that was very straightforward and very helpful to understand how it's working in Williston. So
Okay.
that's very helpful.
All right.
So I have a question. Maybe this is more for Becky and maybe also for you. Is it possible for us to get some redacted samples of these contracts to kind of see what they're about? I mean, is that something you know, maybe from both Williston and from, if you're able to work through who is it again? Remind me who's in Williston?
Crystal Lee.
Crystal Lee.
Crystal Lee,
Yeah,
yeah.
if you could work through her.
Yeah.
It might be really nice for us to see what that looks like, because it's come up several times as far as completing contracts, and having a few examples that are redacted would be great.
I teach a class at Vermont Law Graduate School with Bobby Sand on restorative justice facilitation. So I can send you redacted affidavits and also redacted agreements related to those. I have them all ready to go.
Excellent. Yeah, if you send those to Nate, and Nate will post them for us. Thank you. So no, that's great. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Okay. I appreciate the invitation.
All right, Willa. So back to Willa where we left off. You were going to say more before you actually, I made you tell us your figure, but you can go backwards and go to the rest of what your presentation was, and then we can talk a little bit of digging into how you came up with the numbers.
For the record, Willa Farrell, Attorney General's Office. I have to say it's a hard act to follow, Rob and Becky, because hearing about the actual details of the work, and what I was really planning to do today was dive into numbers. So like sort of like a shift from maybe the power of restorative justice is some sort of dry financial matters. So I was just going to dive into the budget if that
Sounds
works
great.
for the committee.
Yeah.
And I also want to introduce Marcy Hodgson, who is the financial director from the Attorney General's Office. Marcy won't say this, but I will say she has, I think, almost 30 years of experience in state government, Department of Corrections, Agency of Agriculture. I can't remember all the places, and I have found her a great colleague and immensely helpful in navigating the role of a grants manager in an appropriate state, being a responsible steward of state funds, I'm trying to say. So the proposal that we are bringing to the Appropriations Committee, and we're going on February 24th, is for approximately $1.7 million to fund pre-charge for FY26. The exact figure is $1,696,177. So I give you that because it is the number that we came up with, and I wanted to explain the process and how we got to that figure. It is a proposal, as with all state government budgets, for 1 year, but I took a 2-year perspective in coming up with that figure for some other reasons I can explain later. The information I used is information I gathered from providers, so current providers of pre-charge, and also our current post-charge court diversion providers, as well as from states' attorneys and the policies they have developed about using pre-charge. I used data from the Department of Corrections, their FY 2024 statistics on referrals to community justice centers, which are broken out by type of referral. So there's reparative panels, direct referrals, which is the category which pre-charge, we use that term now, pre-charge diversion. And as you know, that work is funded through FY20 through this fiscal year by the Department of Corrections, but it will not be funded next year, as was discussed yesterday. So there are two components to what we did. First, I looked at existing services, and I came up with a figure of a little over $1 million to fund existing services. And I calculated that as a portion of the FY 2024 base grants to community justice centers that had what I call significant pre-charge. So that was whether a quarter to 90% of their referrals through their DOC data was for pre-charge. So I only looked at sort of those entities that were doing a significant amount of pre-charge. And I prorated their grant relative to their referral sources. Wasn't like a direct, because a pre-charge case doesn't take as much as COSA, so I sort of tweaked it a little bit. I also asked most of those providers to tell me, what did it cost you to do pre-charge in that fiscal year? And that validated, they weren't dollar for dollar, but there were comparable figures that I received. And then I added 6% to talk about FY26, 2 years later, 3% per year, which is what the governor has included in budget instructions the past few years. Then to take pre-charge statewide, I came up with a figure of about 600,000. And that's for about 8 organizations where currently there's some pre-charge, but not a significant amount, or no pre-charge. And for all those providers are ones which the AGO already funds to do post-charge diversion, YSAS, DLS, and pretrial services. And that amount was based on the addition of 1 FTE per organization. And I used the starting entry-level salary that I drew from previous budgets that those organizations had provided us. Little aside, so every fiscal year, our grantees provide us a budget on a template we provide that has salaries, benefits, and then all the other expenses related to that. And then they submit quarterly a report that compares by those line items what their expenditures were. And then it's trued up at the end of the fiscal year. We advance funds on a quarterly basis. So in July, we advance funds for 1 quarter. And then in October, I always have to do that. July, September. Yeah, but I'm sorry, I'm getting myself confused. After 3 months, we get a financial report that we then, if they had spent what we allocated, they get in another quarter. If they haven't spent all of it, then they only get prorated amount. So I got a little off track here. I wanted to just provide a bit of context about the factors that in sort of the broader context that informed this analysis, apart from the numbers. One was, it's difficult, where there's uncertainties. From our experience, it takes time to develop a new program. So in 2017, pretrial services was established and came to the Attorney General's office. It took about 2 or 3 years for that program to really get established and for there to be some sort of consistency of service need and use in a county, which is partly why I was thinking about a 2-year time frame. The first year, programs will need to recruit, hire, train. There'll be more supervision needed. So there's this element of uncertainty. We don't know how this program will play out in each county. So there's that unknown. And I feel confident that the numbers I came up with and that Marcy and I worked through together are informed on our past experience as grant administrators and information that we have about how the state has funded this work to date, plus then the ability to take it statewide. That's, I'm happy to answer questions.
No, that's very helpful. No, that's
Yes.
very helpful to understand. So, questions? must be Friday. It must be right before lunch and freedom. So Angela, thank you.
I will. Yeah, I just wanted to double check
Yes.
that, sort of when we left off and at the end of, when 645 was conceived and then passed.
Right.
The thinking was that, there would be a single grant recipient in each county.
Yes.
And that there would be potential in some counties for that single grant holder to provide grants, grants to existing centers to-
Yes.
to provide pre-charge services. Is that still the thinking?
So part of what I've been doing the past year is in Act 188, 645, there was an assignment to our office to submit a report to this committee and others by April 1 about how to streamline the administration and provision of pre and post-charge diversion in counties where there's more than one provider. So I've been doing that work. And it's entailed a lot of conversations and multiple meetings and exploring different options, and we're still in that process. So we'll certainly have a report by April 1, possibly sooner, but that is ongoing work that we're doing.
Okay, so I guess I'm wondering then how, if that's how that factors into the budgeting.
Well, I mean, was part of the challenge of doing this, not knowing, and also part of the 2-year context that I was thinking about in terms of transitions and streamlining and going from, right now, no one knows what funding the legislature will appropriate. So here's many of these organizations, including municipalities, as Chief Burke spoke to yesterday, are uncertain what, if any, funds will be coming to support this work and are putting placeholder budgets together. And so all that to say is that uncertainty is also in our office in terms of trying to make the best informed budget, knowing that just having uncertainty also about how that will play out and how do we create a transition on July 1 when we won't even know until May what funding is available.
Right. But that's nothing unusual, not knowing what the funding is at this point, correct?
Well, the difference here, Representative Gosselin, is for us to date for post-charge court diversion and pretrial services, we have had funding. And so then we're formed, you may budget for, say, a 3% increase. So we can tell our grantees, unless something very unusual happens, in the governor's budget, there is there's a strong likelihood we are going to have this amount of money to fund post-charge diversion. But we don't know, in the governor's budget for FY 2026, there is no appropriation for pre-charge diversion. So we don't, there's a possibility there will be no funding. And that's the uncertainty.
Yeah, what? So I happen to like the program. I think you know that.
Yeah.
Is there a way that pre-charge and this diversion, is there a way that the people that are using it, because we want them to use it, or I want them to use it, but possibility there could be it's a great outlook, a great way to readjust your life, however I want to say that, trying to say that. Is there a way to charge more for that to offset some of these costs?
Well,
Because it's quite a bargain that they're getting. It's way less than court. It's a great learning experience if you want to learn from it.
right.
I just wonder if there's other revenue mechanisms that would be more, where there could be a better understanding earlier on what it is, what stuff is gonna cost, because there's no question about it, the governor's budget, everything, I mean, it's like, we're looking at how expensive it is in this state, we're looking at the crime that is skyrocketing. And that's just one of my concerns. I'm just trying to make stuff viable and
Right.
trying to give people that want to change their lives, that made a little bit of a mess up, give them another chance.
Yes. No, I appreciate your support and respect for the work, that we've heard about. And with post-charge diversion, we do charge a fee. So there is a fee, and I didn't speak, and Marcy may know this. I think it was about 200,000 maybe we brought in last year statewide from fees paid by participants. And the law that you passed last year does envision a fee for pre-charge. We do use a sliding fee scale so that if, some people can pay the $175 and they write the check that day. Other people pay $25 a week, and sometimes we reduce that fee. Often we reduce.
What is the sliding rate? Where does it go? How high and how low?
So the full payment is 175. We don't charge a fee in family division for youth. So it's for adults only, and it can be waived. And we take the federal poverty level and reduce it, proportionately based on your income.
Thank you.
Other questions? See none, and I see that we have no more witnesses this week, and so how about that? Done by noon, at 5 to noon. Be okay. I don't know. I'm gonna look for something we can bring in a legislative council that one could. No, we are adjourned.